This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of April 27th, 2020, brought to you by the law firm Krieg DeVault. I'm Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Well, it's been nearly 7 weeks since the World Health Organization declared that the coronavirus outbreak had become a pandemic. 5 days later, on March 16th, Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb issued an order that restaurants discontinue on-premises dining. On March 23rd, he ordered Hoosiers to stay home, except for those performing essential tasks. And obviously, these are things that almost every state has experienced. Speaking for myself, it has been surprising to see how quickly the national conversation has gone from when is the pandemic going to hit its peak to how quickly can we reopen the economy? When can we go back to work and eat at a restaurant? Now, obviously, there is an incredible sense of urgency about this. Over the last 5 weeks, 26 million Americans have made initial filings for unemployment benefits, including about 500,000 in Indiana. And after first claiming that he would be the ultimate authority on reopening the economy, President Trump on April 14th said each governor would make the call for his or her own state. Last week, Governor Holcomb told businesses they needed to start planning to reopen, although he didn't set a particular date, or what's probably more likely a schedule of how restrictions gradually would loosen. But that process could start as soon as early May. So the obvious question here is, what do companies and restaurants think reopening will look like? What exactly are they considering? How do they envision minimizing the risk for their employees and customers? Should masks and gloves be optional, or should everybody be required to wear scuba gear over a hazmat suit? This is new territory for everybody, and at least at the moment, there are very few consensus guidelines beyond the obvious of washing your hands and staying far, far away from work if you feel sick. Now, for this week's issue of IBJ, our reporters spread out across central Indiana and across the economy to find answers. For the podcast, we're going to focus on two of the biggest workplace sectors, offices and restaurants. So here's my Zoom-assisted conversation with reporters Anthony Shuey and Mickey Shuey. You'll hear that it takes a couple of unexpected turns. Frankly, I think it's odd to pretend that we're not all a part of this story. And it made sense towards the end of the conversation to talk about how we personally feel about returning to some semblance of what you might consider normality. All right, joining me in IBJ's podcast virtual studio is reporter Anthony Shuey, who has written about what office life could look like in the coming months. Anthony, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by reporter Mickey Shuey, who has interviewed a broad swath of restaurateurs about what we can expect when we're allowed back into their main dining rooms. Welcome, Mickey.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just to give folks some context, we're taping this on Thursday, April 23rd. Earlier today, we got the latest numbers on new applications for unemployment benefits, both for Indiana and the United States. Nationwide, more than 4.4 million people applied for jobless benefits last month. That brings the 5-week total to 26 million people. In Indiana, another 75,000 people applied for benefits for a 5-week total somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 people. I think the question everybody wants an answer to is, when can everybody get back to work? So, Mickey, do we have an idea when restaurants will be able to open for dining room service again?
So that's currently being figured out. The governor has reached out to a variety of trade associations to figure out how best to reopen the economy. And the Indiana Restaurant and Lodging Association is one of those groups. And they will have sent their recommendations to the governor by the end of this week. But they're really not willing to say much about how soon they would like the economy to reopen, particularly the restaurant sector. We're likely looking at mid-May, if not later. It could be June. The truth is, we really just don't know right now, because of all the uncertainty surrounding the number of cases and how this virus is going to affect people as certain sectors reopen. You know, the governor and all of his people, and the mayor and all of his people, are so consumed with trying to get the spread of COVID-19 under control
that I doubt that they've had very much time to think about some very practical issues with respect to the way restaurants are going to operate or are going to have to operate when they reopen. And maybe they're going to leave that up to restaurant owners. I've tried to get a question in to the governor here for a couple of days about, what the state is willing to mandate and what the state is willing to just let businesses figure out or mandate on their own. For instance, are waiters and waitresses, bar servers and so forth, going to be mandated by the state and the city to wear masks? N95 masks, surgical masks, cloth masks, all those legitimate questions. Will they be required to wear gloves? There's seemingly endless number of questions of how they're going to have to operate. And then we broached the subject of, will that turn people off? Do you want to go get a hamburger and beer at a place where everybody's masked and gloved like a surgeon?
Well, that's a great question. I got the impression, Mickey, that right now they're not really willing to say. So maybe we can just resolve that. I mean, for the purposes of your stories, I mean, you asked your sources, like, what is likely or what are they looking at right now?
Right. What I've heard on my end as far as restaurants go is they are looking at, even if the city or the state don't mandate things, a lot of restaurateurs are preparing to take steps on their own to ensure the safety of their guests and their staff through continued use of masks by their staff, health screenings, things like that.
So my impression is that most folks are saying that we have to be prepared to work or be together, eat together in very different ways until there's a vaccine, which could be more than a year. Is that essentially what you heard?
Yes, in very different ways. In many respects, I have a real empathy for the business owners here, because things that never registered a thought in anyone's brain are now really requiring some fairly serious computations. Let's take two very simple examples. And we've talked about waitresses and waiters and tables and all these sorts of things. What about the waiting area in a restaurant? Think about St. Elmo's Steakhouse for a second and how tight that is on a Friday or Saturday night. What do you do about that? You tell people to stay out? You want to be a restaurateur telling people to stand outside? Maybe this time of year it wouldn't be that bad. Let's take a regular business person. Now, my story dealt with offices, what office protocol is going to be. I had one executive, top executive of a big company, tell me he has concerns right now about how many people can be in the bathroom at one time. Think about that for a second. How are you going to monitor that? How are you going to police that? Had another executive says he has serious concerns about how many people can be in an elevator, and that maybe we need to put X's on the elevator floor to assure people stand in assigned spots. I had another executive tell me that he is putting tape directional markers on the floor, and that people will only be able to walk in a counterclockwise direction in his office building going forward. And I've had, several people say that they believe it will be this way. We're not talking a week, a month, the summer. We're talking about 18 months probably until we get a vaccination, that things are going to be radically different. And we've seen the issues we've had with testing and other things. How do you think it's going to be when a vaccine comes out? You think you're just going to head down to CVS and get one? I doubt it.
So, Mickey, take me into a restaurant after we're allowed back in. And Anthony had a great question about just like the waiting area. Did they address that when you spoke with the restaurateurs?
They really said that they're still trying to kind of work through what that will look like. But one thing all the restaurateurs I talked to were sure of is it's not going to be the same coming out of this. It's not as if we're going to go right back to having large gatherings in the waiting area of restaurants until a table is ready. It's probably going to be more a reservation type setup where a group gets a table for 2 hours, and then they turn it around and completely disinfect it as they would normally, but probably with even more standards in place. And then the next group is permitted to come in, or they take a table next to it. This is going to drastically change how people go out to eat for the next 18 months, if not longer.
So would I have to wear, say, gloves and a mask? Would that be considered, important equipment for a dining experience?
Some restaurants are considering doing that. Eddie Som with the Som family of restaurants told me that he's considering enacting a similar thing to the no shirt, no shoes, no service thing, where it's no mask, no gloves, no service. Basically insisting that patrons follow the same strict procedures that his staff do, not just to protect patrons from one another, but to protect the staff, because they're the ones handling the food and operating the facility where all these people are congregating.
But if you have a no mask, no gloves, no service policy, you might as well just stay closed. I mean, think about the optics of that for a moment. Think about the optics of that. I mean, the optics of servers wearing masks and gloves is bad enough. But everybody inside of a restaurant, I mean, it almost sounds funny. It almost sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it's not funny. I mean, this is the health and well-being of people, and this is the health and well-being of businesses. I just am not sure there's a workable solution. I'm not going into, whether it's St. Elmo's or Coach's Tavern, I'm not going in there in a mask and gloves and eating my lunch, hamburger, steak, whatever. I'm going to get carry out, or I'm going to stay at home. I mean, barbecue season's coming up, people, but it's a tough situation. I mean, I understand what Mickey's saying, and I understand what the restaurateurs are. I mean, the ICLU is going to have to get involved in this. I mean, are you starting to talk about your civil liberties now? This is a really complex and difficult situation.
Well, let me follow the premise that Mickey has. I know that, for example, some of the restaurateurs that you spoke with said that the possibility they may take the temperatures of the patrons before they seat them.
Yeah, they may follow the protocols that some airports have in place now, where they are screening patrons to eliminate the potential spread of the virus. And certainly not all patrons are going to be exhibiting symptoms if they have it, but it's just a step that a lot of restaurateurs feel they need to take to protect the wider population. And it should be noted, to Anthony's point, that several of these groups, they sounded open when I was speaking with them to the possibility of kind of having a point where if somebody doesn't have a mask, they would be willing to provide one, much like at a fancy restaurant where you have to have a coat and somebody doesn't have one, so they have some hung up for you to borrow.
So they give you a collared shirt and a mask.
Maybe we could have a masked area, like a smoking and no smoking, masked area and no masked area. But I will say this, in all seriousness, I had one executive tell me, and again, my heart goes out to these business owners trying to make these decisions. He said, every challenge, everything we have to answer only brings about a dozen more questions. And here's a good point on that. Mickey says some restaurateurs are talking about taking people's temperatures. Well, I'm not a physician. I don't even have a thermometer here in my house. But what kind of thermometer are we talking about?
We have one here at our house where that can basically read your temperature by focusing on your forehead, the temperature on your forehead.
So it's a no-touch thermometer.
It's not invasive. It is a no-touch thermometer.
Okay.
But here's the thing. I mean, and this has been an issue in our house. I'm not convinced it's that accurate, because over the course of a minute, the variation in temperatures can be like as much as 1.5 degrees. It's very frustrating. Now, to your other point too, Anthony, about really the viability of doing this, my understanding for Mickey's story is that in order to observe social distancing guidelines, a lot of restaurants are going to have about half the seating that they normally would have. Is that what you heard?
A lot of these restaurants are expecting to open up with half or less of their typical seating. In fact, the Restaurant Lodging Association here in Indiana, they're fully expecting that to be the case. And that opens up a whole other can of worms from an economics standpoint, because in speaking with the owner of St. Elmo, if they're operating their restaurants at 50% capacity, generally speaking, they're closing their restaurants. That's just not enough to pay all the bills. So it's going to be a really big question for a lot of these restaurants if they're able to make up what they're missing in terms of carry out and delivery service, whether they reopen the dining rooms to try and bump up their revenue a little bit more, or they just keep doing what they're doing until things, quote unquote, go back to normal.
Now, I know some of them have applied for the small business aid that the government has applied in a couple different rounds of it, but that is only going to get them, if I'm right, a few months.
So Hughes Culinary, owner of St. Elmo, received about $6.3 million from the SBA payroll protection program. That's a forgivable loan, and that's going to get them through June 12th, essentially.
I do want to point out real quick, they do operate other restaurants besides St.
Correct.
Elmo. They have Harry and Izzy's. They have Burger Steady as well.
Correct, but that $6.3 million should cover employees for all their restaurants through June 12th, and after that, they may be having some difficult conversations about which ones are going to stay open or how they manage staffs or cut staffs because of declines in revenue. I mean, they've been closed since the middle of March when all this came into effect.
Now, here's where your stories kind of converge. So I know you spoke with Ed Rudisell, who's the owner of the Thai restaurant Siam Square in Fountain Square. Mm-hmm. And his business is highly reliant on lunch customers from the Eli Lilly corporate campus nearby. Does he expect an influx of customers when Lilly workers return to the office?
He really doesn't. He's very cautious about how many people are actually going to make that trip. He's expecting that more will continue to use the carryout and delivery options that are available. Certainly, if people start coming back to work in the downtown area, particularly at Lilly, that may bring a boost. But he's also like they're on razor thin margins right now, as most restaurants are in general. Even before all this, it's really tough to know how a restaurant that's going to be affected in the long term by the lack of downtown business and what it's going to look like if people start gradually coming back.
All right, let's take a quick break from the conversation to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is brought to you by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast. We're talking this week with IBJ's own Anthony Shutley and Mickey Shuey about what office spaces and restaurants could look like once we get the all clear to go back to work and enjoy a meal out. Now, Anthony, are business owners talking about taking people's temperatures before they are allowed into the office?
Some are. What I would say in comment to what Mickey just said is, and I'm not going to make a statement about any one company, but any restaurant or any business that relies on employees coming back into large companies with a sizable mass of employees in Indianapolis shouldn't hold their breath. Those companies have dozens, but more likely hundreds of people in low-walled cubicles on single floors. And those companies are going to be the last people to put their people back in their cubicles. Big companies with lots of people on a single floor or single floors have a real problem, a real big problem right now until we get a vaccine. So I wouldn't expect those people to come back en masse anytime soon.
I haven't been in all of the Lilly corporate offices, but I know that a while back, some of their workspaces went to the open office plan, right? Where you show up, it's kind of like being in an airport. I mean, you sit down where you want to sit down that day. There are a lot of common areas where, everybody is invited to sit and have, accidental conversations in which they sort of spontaneously collaborate on stuff. It's supposed to be good for creativity. I know a lot of offices have gone to that. We've gone to that to an extent. It seems like coronavirus has basically slapped that stuff back into the Stone Age. I mean,
Well,
is it possible to have that anymore?
Cubicles have been around since the 70s. Most of those cubicles extend 5 to 6 feet up in the air, provide great, acoustical privacy, so on and so forth. About 5 or 6 years ago, employers started getting concerned about a few things. Productivity with the internet. People can do whatever they want in their cubicles on company time with their internet and what have you. And so by way of increasing productivity, collaboration, and communication, they lowered those cubicles and they went to more open barrier. But there's another thing about the configurations in offices that you've seen. Those new configurations with lower walls and smaller cubicles, 4 foot wide and 2 foot deep, allow you to put 40 to 60% more people on a floor. With big global companies, they got a lot of people traveling. So you don't want a desk sitting empty day upon day, week upon week when somebody's traveling 20 weeks a year. So what do? You institute a policy called hoteling, which means anybody can take any desk that they want. So now you've got open offices, low walls or no walls, desk swapping, tighter areas, more people in a confined space, which is great for communication, collaboration, and productivity. But it's bad in the post-COVID health era. Not too many workers are going to want to sit face-to-face with a coworker 48 inches away with no wall in between them. I've had executives tell me that they're only going to start seating people in a diagonal fashion. They're going to get rid of couches, and they're going to get rid of anything with a soft surface. They're going to issue disposable placemats for employees. Those may be Band-Aids. Those may placate workers. They may not. This may very quickly become the new and most important retention and recruitment problem employers face. Nobody wants to die because they went into the office to do their job. And no employer wants their employee to die. Let's be straight here. This is a real problem that people aren't going to stand for.
You've got a line in your story that I really love. Basically, you say that the new rules of the office workplace are the old rules that we had in junior high.
They really are. I mean, think about, no touching, let's see daylight between friends here, let's walk this way, not that. I mean, it's going to seem almost like a police state, and we Americans aren't used to that. But that's what it's going to kind of be. But I think, one executive told me, one of the more aggressive executives in all of this told me, if the people feel like we are doing this for the greater good and for the health of people, then they'll go along with it. I tend to agree, although what have we seen here in the last week? People protesting because they want to get back to regular life. Well, I get that. But can we really afford to go back to life as we knew it before the coronavirus?
Now, you talked with John Wechsler, who's the founder and CEO of Lawrence Fisher's, and he's one of the more aggressive minds on this. And a couple of things that he mentioned that they're looking at, for example, are one-way traffic patterns. The traffic in the office is like a roundabout. You can only go like counterclockwise. And also video cameras. What was he trying to get at with the cameras?
Yeah, we're talking about spatial analytics. John is extremely innovative. He's a tech guy. Not only does he run Launch Fisher's, but he runs the Indiana Internet of Things lab. He is wanting to use cameras placed about his facility that will essentially count and monitor how many people are in certain areas, whether those are conference rooms, whether those are hallways, whether those are in just parts of the office. And then an administrator, either he or an administrator, will be notified if a maximum limit is hit. And then the administrator will be obviously dispensed to go and disperse those people. Basically tell them, get out.
Are offices going to supply masks and hand sanitizers and all that stuff, or am I going to be expected to bring my own?
Where are you going to get them? You tried to order masks lately? They are trying. I had one executive tell me he was trying to get 55-gallon drums of hand sanitizer, but I had one executive tell me they were trying to procure between 1,000 and 1,500 masks. Well, he had several hundred employees. You're supposed to use a new mask every day unless it's a cloth, washable, soap and water washable mask. We'll do the math on that. That's about 4 days, 3 days supplies. And I think, employers will start by making suggestions and hoping that people abide by those things. those suggestions will get stronger and stronger. I think eventually you're going to have to turn them into mandates. And the reason is this: we all want to do what's good for the greater good. But just the three of us here, I'll bet you have three different ideas on what that is. And so, Mickey may be comfortable with 5 people in the elevator, and you may be comfortable with 4 people in the elevator, and I may only be comfortable with 2 people in the elevator. So, where do you draw those lines? How do you build a consensus on issues that were before irrelevant, mundane, and ridiculous?
I'm glad you kind of brought that up. I wanted to know how you guys felt about this stuff. Let me ask you about restaurants first. Anthony, what's it going to take for you to get back into a restaurant?
I am fortunate because a couple of my favorite haunts don't have an enormous clientele, so I could probably get a table away from a lot of people. You got to know the secret low-profile places that have great food. I know a couple of those. But a couple of my favorites downtown are quite busy, very busy, and tight quarters and congested. I think about the air that I breathe there, and I think about the straw that I drink out of. One of my very favorite restaurants, they know me. I get my Coke delivered straight to my table with a straw without any paper on it. I got to think about that now. I got to think about the utensils. Look, I'm a pretty middle-class guy. I don't go to high-end white tablecloth restaurants. I go to bars where they use a rag and a little bit of, previously, a towel used for every table, right? Same towel, every table. Spray it off, wipe it down. I really hate to say wait till a vaccine. I really hate to say that. I guess I'm like a lot of people, Mason. I really don't know what it's going to take. I really don't.
Mickey, did you think about that when you were reporting your story? I mean, what would it take for you to feel comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly in a very similar boat to Anthony. I mean, while I'm still ordering carry out from local restaurants, trying to support them during this time, I mean, I think it's going to take a while for me personally to return to that level of normalcy. I mean, I actually was I was on Twitter yesterday, and there was a question circulating about, so give me the date and year that you think you'll feel comfortable being back in a crowded restaurant surrounded by people eating your food. And a lot of people said maybe later this year, maybe early next. I'm thinking it's probably going to, like, for me personally, it will probably not be until late next year, late 2021, after vaccines hopefully been administered and people have actually started to receive it and herd immunity starts, that I'll feel comfortable being back in those places.
Every time a restaurant opens down here where I live on the south side, it's shoulder to shoulder in the waiting room. I mean, it really is. And it's, you're touching people you've never met or known or anything else. And, so some of the haunts I go to are moms and pops. And I really wonder, are they going to open back up? Can they open back up? Do they have the resources to weather the storm? I'm quite certain some of them do not, and some of them will not. And that's pretty sad.
What's it going to take, Anthony, to get you back into the office?
I'm going to have to take Mickey's temperature. He sits next to me in the office. In all seriousness, some of the listeners here may know, the Indianapolis Business Journal moved into a new office in March of 2019. We have more of an open concept with more collaboration spaces. I think the office was smartly designed. We have what they call seated height cubicles, which means the cubicles are about 2 inches over your head if you're seated. They're not quite as tall as they used to be in our old location. But I have some concerns. I'm not going to kid you. I was one of the first people to leave and work from home in early March. Mm. I declined to go to a staff meeting in early March.
I don't want to paint you as being an obstinate person. I mean, you have had a lot of respiratory issues over the last at least 20 years that I recall.
I have. Yeah. And so I'm pretty careful about that. It's a good question. I guess I'm in the same situation as a lot of people. I'm kind of waiting to see. I mean, it's really an odd situation. You're sitting here going, well, I hope things look different in May. Like there's going to be a magic bullet and some sort of magical recession, almost kind of like we see with the flu, right? The flu that decreases greatly in the summer months. But this thing is so highly contagious. I really don't know. Quite frankly, at this point, I'm lucky to be able to work from home with the technology that we have. And I'm probably going to work from home just as long as I possibly can. If it starts having a dramatic effect on my productivity, or if the number of illnesses, COVID-19 illnesses reported each day decreases dramatically, then I will consider coming in.
And Mickey, what do you think?
I'm kind of in the same boat as Anthony. I know he loves he loved seeing me every day and telling me to not cough in his direction. But I think that it will take a bit of an adjustment in the numbers and decline in the numbers for me to feel comfortable going back in the office. I mean, it got to a point where, well, I probably should have done this last month. I actually opted to suspend my parking pass downtown because I felt like I'm not at a point where I think I'm going to be able to go back for a while. So it just makes financial sense to hold off on that for now.
Oh, that's a good call. What did I do? About 6 months ago, I think I discontinued my parking because I just wanted to get more exercise. And so I just parked farther away and walked in. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. I don't have to worry about paying for my parking, but I bet there are a lot of people who still do.
Yeah, the garage that I use sounds like they've seen a dramatic drop in a number of people who are actually paying for their spots because of the decline in office use.
And, Mason, you asked a question about when we would feel comfortable coming back into the office. I think it's prudent to state that, as far as I know, no one at the IBJ has come down with coronavirus. Now, ask me that question, or ask Mickey that question, or ask anybody that question if somebody in the IBJ gets coronavirus, if somebody in the editorial department of IBJ gets coronavirus. We're talking about a second wave of this coming, if not this summer, then the fall. Now, ask me then, ask anybody then, what happens if a large global company with 300 or 400 people, what happens if 1 or 2 people come down with coronavirus in that business or on that floor? Then how comfortable are you coming in? I would suggest not very comfortable.
Well, I have to say, just for myself, I have always really enjoyed going into the office. I like having a separate space to do work and then a different home life. I've never been comfortable so much with mixing both of them, but I also really love having work friends. And so I miss hanging out with you guys. It's a real loss for me. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Usually I say, hey, I'll check back with you in a few months and see how things go. Maybe in a couple of weeks.
Well, Zoom again.
All right, I'll see you next time on the Zoom.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Adios.
My thanks again to Anthony and Mickey. I have a quick postscript. Basically, minutes after we finished that interview, Fisher's Mayor Scott Fadness announced he would introduce several initiatives to help local businesses wrap their heads around reopening. They would include concise safety protocols for a variety of different kinds of businesses. Also, live consultants who could provide advice for specific issues. So to answer Anthony's question, yes, some government officials are beginning to help businesses define the post-shutdown world. Again, Anthony and Mickey's stories are at the center of IBJ's coverage of the eventual economic resurgence. In this week's print edition, we've devoted the entire front page to stories about how the next few months could play out, including an interview with an infectious disease specialist from IU Health who discusses how the timing of reopening Central Indiana workplaces could unfold over the summer. And Susan Orr takes a closer look at what manufacturers are doing to protect their employees. You can check out all these stories in the latest issue of IBJ, as well as at IBJ.com. Now, most of our coverage of the coronavirus crisis can be accessed for free on the website for all readers, and that includes our continuously updated digest of all the latest news. It is called The Latest, and you will see it on the IBJ homepage. And remember, for unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content from today, yesterday, and the previous economic crisis, just hit the subscribe button. Thanks for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.